The night was cold, and the streets of the alien city were darker than usual. A thin figure walked slowly under the broken streetlights. It was a widow, her clothes torn and her shawl barely covering her shoulders. Her steps were weak, and her eyes looked empty, like she had carried too much pain for too long. She had knocked on many doors that day. Every time the door opened just a little and voices came from inside. Some voices shouted, some whispered cruel words, but all of them ended the same way. The door slammed shut, leaving her outside. "No home wants a widow like you." One alien woman had hissed, "Your presence will curse our children." Another alien man had thrown dust at her feet and said, "Go die in the alleys, you are not welcome here." The widow had stood silently, tears burning in her eyes, but she did not argue. She was too tired to fight. All she wanted was a little warmth, just a fire or a corner to sleep without shaking from the cold. But in her world, widows were seen as broken, useless, even dangerous. And so, every door rejected her. Now, as she walked through the empty streets, her body shook in the freezing wind. She pulled the shawl tighter, but it was too thin to stop the cold. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she ignored it. Hunger was familiar, but the cold, it was like knives cutting into her skin. She looked up at the sky, at the moons hanging pale above the tall alien buildings. Once, when her husband was alive, those same moons had felt gentle, almost beautiful. But after his death, everything had changed. He had died working in the mines, crushed by falling stone, and the people of her colony had blamed her. They said she carried bad luck. They said her shadow would ruin families. Her husband's family had thrown her out. Friends had turned their faces away. Even the elders of her community had declared that no home should take her in. She was marked, unwanted. She stumbled now, her knees hitting the ground. For a moment she thought of just staying there, letting the cold finish her life. Maybe then the pain would stop. Maybe then she would no longer hear the cruel voices. But something deep inside still whispered, "Keep walking. Don't fall yet." So she pushed herself up and leaned against the stone wall of a workshop. The faint smell of oil and smoke came from inside. It was warmer here, just a little, and she closed her eyes, trying to steal that warmth through the cracks in the wall. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved silently as if she was praying, though she did not even know who would listen anymore. That was when she heard footsteps. Strong, steady footsteps. Not the hurried kind of someone passing by, but slow, heavy steps that stopped right in front of her. The widow froze. Fear rushed through her veins. Usually footsteps at night meant trouble. She opened her eyes and saw a figure standing above her. It was not an alien. It was a human. He was tall, his shoulders broad, his clothes covered in oil stains like he worked with machines. His face was rough, but his eyes were not cruel. They were calm, almost curious, as they looked down at her shivering form. For a long moment neither spoke. The alien widow lowered her head, ashamed. She expected him to laugh, to spit, or to walk away like everyone else, but instead, he crouched down, bringing himself to her level. His voice was quiet, steady. "You're freezing," he said, his breath making small clouds in the air. The widow's lips trembled. She wanted to answer, but no words came. She had forgotten how it felt to be spoken to gently. The human looked at her for a moment longer. Then slowly, he pulled off his heavy coat and placed it over her shoulders. The widow gasped, clutching the fabric. It was warm, carrying the heat of his body. For the first time in years, she felt something other than cold. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Why? Why would you give this to me?" The human tilted his head slightly. "Because no one deserves to freeze outside." His words were simple, but they cut through the wall of pain around her heart. She had begged many times, but no one had listened. And now this human, a stranger, gave her warmth without even asking for her name. The widow looked at him with wide eyes, still unsure if this was real. Could kindness still exist? Or was this just another cruel trick? Before she could decide, the human stood and held out his hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady. "I have a fire inside." The widow stared at his hand. Her heart raced. She wanted to believe him, but years of rejection had taught her only fear. Still, the memory of cold nights, of endless hunger, pushed her forward. Her fingers, thin and trembling, reached for his hand. And in that moment, something changed. For the first time since her husband's death, she was not standing alone in the dark. The widow's fingers rested weakly in his hand, and the human helped her stand. She felt fragile like a leaf in a storm, as if the next cold wind would tear her apart. His hand was rough, hardened by work, but it carried a steady warmth that gave her strength she did not know she had left. The human led her toward the door of his workshop. The walls were stained with smoke, and the metal door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of oil, fire, and something cooked long ago. The widow hesitated on the threshold, her heart pounding. No alien had ever opened a door for her after her husband's death, and now here was a human offering her a place inside. She stopped, her feet refusing to move. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." The human turned, his dark eyes steady on her. "Do I need to know you?" he asked calmly. "I saw you shivering. That's enough." The widow trembled at his words. They were so simple, yet they broke the iron chains of rejection that had bound her for years. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if he wanted something in return? What if this kindness was only a trap? The human noticed her hesitation. His voice grew softer. "You can leave whenever you want. I'm not forcing you. But there's a fire inside. It's warmer than the streets." Her body screamed for warmth, but her heart screamed for safety. She stood frozen, caught between fear and hope. Finally, her shaking legs carried her inside. The workshop was messy but alive. Tools hung from the walls. Strange machines sat half-finished on the tables. In one corner, a furnace glowed softly, filling the air with gentle heat. The widow almost collapsed near it, her thin hands reaching toward the fire as if afraid it would vanish. The warmth touched her skin and she closed her eyes, letting out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. The human set an old blanket around her shoulders. She looked up in surprise. His face was serious but not unkind. He moved like someone used to being alone, someone who fixed things no one else cared about. "What is your name?" he asked after a long silence. The widow flinched. It had been so long since anyone had asked her that. Her lips moved, unsure if she should tell him, but the truth slipped out. "Lyra," she whispered. The human nodded once. "I'm Daniel." His name sounded strange on her tongue when she repeated it softly. Daniel. She felt the weight of the moment, her cursed name spoken beside his simple one. Daniel moved to the furnace, adding a piece of fuel. Sparks rose, bright against the dark air. Then he picked up a pot from a shelf and filled it with water. Soon the smell of something boiling filled the room. Lyra blinked in shock. Was he cooking for her? No one had cooked for her since her husband's death. When Daniel set a bowl of hot broth in front of her, she stared at it as if it were treasure. The steam warmed her face, and she lifted it carefully to her lips. The taste was simple, just salt and herbs, but to her it was the richest meal in the galaxy. Her eyes filled with tears again. She tried to speak, but only a broken whisper came out. "No one has ever done this for me. Not since." Her voice cracked, and she could not finish. Daniel did not push her to explain. He only said, "Eat. You need strength." As she sipped the broth, her mind spun with questions. Why was a human, an outsider, showing her more kindness than her own people? Humans were often mocked in the city, called reckless and strange. Yet this man, this stranger, had done what no alien dared. Her heart wanted to trust him, but fear still sat heavy inside her. What if tomorrow he grew tired of her? What if he asked for payment she could not give? Daniel seemed to sense her unease. He leaned back on his chair, his voice steady. You don't owe me anything. Not now, not ever. Just stay warm. Lyra's throat tightened. She had dreamed of hearing such words, but never believed she would. Could it be true? Could this human really mean it? The fire crackled, and for the first time in years, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt safe. But outside the workshop, the city never slept. Already, whispers were rising among the alien neighbors. Some had seen the human carry the widow inside. Some had laughed, calling him a fool. Others had frowned, muttering that he would regret it. Lyra did not yet know the storm this simple kindness would bring. She only knew that tonight, she was not lying in the freezing streets. Tonight, she was alive because a human stranger had decided she deserved warmth. As Daniel checked the furnace, his eyes lingered on her fragile form wrapped in his coat. He thought quietly to himself, she looks like a broken bird. But maybe, just maybe, she can fly again. The widow sat close to the fire, clutching the bowl of broth, her heart racing with fear and fragile hope. She had stepped into a stranger's world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fire inside Daniel's workshop burned brighter, filling the space with a soft orange glow. For Lyra, the widow, it felt unreal. Just hours ago, she was shivering outside, ready to collapse in the street. Now she was wrapped in warmth, a blanket over her shoulders, Daniel's heavy coat across her lap, and a bowl of broth still warming her hands. Her eyes moved around the room. It was messy, but alive. Tools hung from hooks, strange alien metals sat stacked in the corner, and pieces of machines lay scattered on the tables. A clock ticked unevenly on the wall. It wasn't a rich man's house, but it was more than she had known in years. Still, her heart would not rest. The fire warmed her skin, but her fear was colder than any winter wind. She had learned not to trust kindness. Too many times a kind hand had turned into a cruel fist. Too many times a promise had turned into rejection. She looked at Daniel, who was cleaning a wrench with a rag. He looked calm, as if having a widow in his workshop was nothing unusual. She whispered softly, "Why are you not afraid?" Daniel lifted his eyes. "Afraid of what?" "Of me," she said bitterly, her voice trembling. "The people say I bring bad luck, that I carry death. You will lose everything if they know you shelter me." Daniel placed the wrench down and leaned back in his chair. His face was serious but steady. "I fix machines that are already broken. Bad luck doesn't scare me. Cruel people do." Lyra's breath caught. No one had ever spoken like that before. To him, she was not cursed, just unwanted by the wrong people. Her fingers tightened on the bowl and she lowered her head, hiding the tears forming in her eyes. Daniel stood and walked to the furnace. He added more fuel, then turned back to her. "You should sleep. You look like you haven't rested in weeks." Her body wanted to obey, but her mind resisted. Sleep meant weakness. Sleep meant leaving herself open to betrayal. "I can't," she whispered. Daniel did not argue. He pulled out an old mattress from the corner, set it near the fire, and placed another blanket on top. "Then just lie down," he said gently. "You don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to." Lyra stared at the mattress. It looked soft compared to the stone ground she was used to. Slowly, carefully, she moved to it and sat. Her body sank into the cushion, and she almost cried from the feeling. She had forgotten what softness was. The fire crackled, the warmth wrapping around her like invisible arms. Her head grew heavy, but she fought it. She turned her face toward Daniel again. Why are you doing this?" Daniel was fixing a small machine, his hands steady. Without looking up, he answered, "Because you deserve more than the street." She pressed her lips together. The words felt impossible to believe, yet here she was, covered in blankets, safe inside his room. Was it truly safety? Or was it just a moment of calm before more pain? Her thoughts swirled as the firelight danced on the walls. For a long while, silence filled the workshop, broken only by the sound of Daniel's tools and the soft hum of the furnace. Slowly, her body betrayed her fears. Her eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowed, and without meaning to, she drifted into sleep. Daniel noticed. He placed his tools down and watched her. She looked younger when she slept, her face less lined with sorrow, though her cheeks were still pale from hunger. He shook his head quietly. "What have they done to you?" he whispered to the empty room. Outside, faint voices echoed in the street. Some neighbors were gossiping, wondering why the human had taken in the cursed widow. But Daniel ignored them. He shut the door firmly and returned to his chair, keeping watch while she slept. Hours passed. The night deepened. Lyra stirred in. Her sleep, her body twitching as if chased by old nightmares. Her lips moved, whispering broken words, pleas, cries, fragments of pain. Daniel walked over and adjusted the blanket, his hand gentle but firm, grounding her back to the present. When she opened her eyes again, the fire was still burning. She blinked, confused, then realized she had slept. For the first time in years, she had truly rested. Her body ached less. Her mind felt a little lighter. She turned her head and saw Daniel asleep in the chair, his arms crossed, his head tilted forward. He looked tired, but strong. Something stirred inside her chest, something she had buried long ago, a feeling she did not want to name. Quietly, she sat up. Her eyes traced the room again. This place was not rich, not beautiful, but it was warm. Warmer than any home she had ever begged at. Warmer than the houses that had rejected her. Her heart whispered a dangerous thought. Maybe this is where I belong, but fear quickly followed. No, she told herself. No human could protect her forever. The city hated her, and soon they would hate him too. She would bring him ruin if she stayed. Her hands clutched the coat tighter. She wanted to leave, to save him from her curse. But as she looked at the fire, as she listened to the steady breathing of the human stranger who had given her warmth, she couldn't move. Her legs refused. For tonight, just tonight, she allowed herself to stay. And as the firelight flickered on her tired face, the widow who had been rejected by every door finally felt something she thought was gone forever: hope. The next morning, the widow woke slowly. The fire had burned low and the room was filled with the soft smell of oil and iron. She blinked in confusion, almost believing last night had been a dream. But when she looked down, the heavy coat around her shoulders reminded her it had been real. She was still in the workshop, still alive, still warm. Daniel was already awake, working at one of his machines. His hands moved with quiet skill, tightening bolts, adjusting gears, as if this was his world and he belonged in it. Lyra sat up on the mattress, feeling both safe and nervous. Safe because of the warmth, nervous because she did not know what the day would bring. He turned when he heard her stir. "You slept," he said simply. She lowered her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. I haven't slept like that in years." Daniel gave a small nod and returned to his tools. He was not a man of many words, but his silence did not feel cold. It felt patient, like he was waiting for her to speak when she was ready. Lyra sat quietly, staring into the low fire. She felt the weight of unspoken words pressing on her chest. Part of her wanted to stay silent forever, to never open her wounds. But another part of her, the part that longed for release, whispered, "Tell him." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Do you know why no one takes me in?" Daniel paused, but he did not answer. He simply looked at her, giving her the space to continue. Lyra gripped the blanket tighter. "They say I carry death, that my shadow brings misfortune. It is because my husband died. He worked in the mines like so many others. The tunnels were weak, the stones loose. I begged him not to go that day. I felt something was wrong, but he smiled and told me not to worry. Her voice cracked. She closed her eyes, the memory hitting her like a blade. He never came back. The mine collapsed. They pulled out bodies broken and covered in dust, and from that day they blamed me. They said my warning was proof I brought it, that my words cursed him. Even his family spat on me. They threw me out of the house. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands resting on the machine, curled into fists. But he stayed silent, letting her speak. They took everything, Lyra whispered. My clothes, my food, even my name. They said a widow has no right to live among them. Some spat at me, others threw stones. And when I tried to work, no one would hire me. I was left to wander. No door opened, no hand reached out. Until last night. Her tears fell freely now, soaking the blanket. Do you know what it feels like, she whispered, to beg only for warmth and still be denied, to be treated as less than dirt? Daniel's eyes burned with anger, but not at her. His voice was low, heavy. Yes, he said. She looked up at him, startled. He met her gaze, his face hard. I've seen cruelty before. On worlds where the strong take everything and the weak are crushed. People blaming others for things they cannot control. It is always the same. Cowards find someone to blame so they can keep their hands clean. Lyra's lips trembled. His words struck her deeply. You don't believe I'm cursed? Daniel's eyes were steady, unshaken. No, I believe you were betrayed. The widow's breath hitched. For years she had carried the weight of those cruel words. To hear someone, even a stranger, say otherwise, it was like chains breaking inside her chest. She whispered, Why do you care? Why do you, a human, care about me? Daniel looked back at the machine, adjusting it slowly. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know what it's like to be left behind. No one deserves that. The room fell silent again, but it was not the heavy silence of pain. It was the silence of truth, of two broken souls sharing pieces of themselves. Lyra wiped her tears, her hands trembling. For the first time, her story had been heard without laughter or cruelty. She felt lighter, though the scars remained. Daniel stood, placing the finished machine aside. He turned to her, his voice calm but firm. As long as I live, you won't be left in the cold again. That much I can promise. Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to those words. But fear whispered again. What if they come for you? What if they try to hurt you because of me? Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes were sharp, unyielding. Then let them try. The way he said it, steady, without doubt, sent a strange warmth through her chest. It was not just kindness now, it was protection. For years Lyra had been invisible, forgotten, treated as a curse. But here, in this small warm room with a human stranger, she felt seen. She felt human again. She pulled the coat tighter around herself and whispered, almost to herself, Maybe the curse is not mine. Maybe it belongs to them. Daniel gave a faint nod as if agreeing, and as the fire flickered brighter, a fragile bond grew stronger between them. One forged not from pity, but from truth. The next days passed slowly, and for the first time in years, Lyra had a roof above her head and warmth in her body. Every morning she helped Daniel by sweeping the workshop floor or washing his tools. She did not know much about machines, but she wanted to give something back. Daniel never asked her for anything, but he allowed her to stay, and that was more than she had dared to dream. Yet outside the workshop walls, whispers began to grow louder. Neighbors had seen her enter Daniel's place. Some had seen the coat around her shoulders. And in the alleys, their voices carried like poison. The human has lost his mind, one alien woman spat, her face twisted with scorn. He took the cursed widow into his home. He invites ruin on us all. Another alien shook his head. Humans are reckless. They don't know our ways. Soon his machines will break, His fire will go out and he'll blame no one but himself. By the third day, the whispers became sharp words. Strangers paused outside Daniel's door, muttering curses, some throwing pebbles against the walls. Lyra heard them clearly, and every word pierced her like a blade. One night, as she sat by the fire, she turned to Daniel. Her voice was heavy with guilt. "They hate me, and now they hate you. I should leave." Daniel did not look up from the machine he was repairing. His voice was steady, unshaken. "No." Her heart ached at his stubbornness. "You don't understand. They will harm you. They will destroy your work. I've brought this curse into your life." Now Daniel looked at her directly, his dark eyes burning with quiet strength. "You didn't bring me a curse, Lyra. They brought their cruelty. Let them hate. I don't bend for cowards." His words were like a wall of stone, unmovable. But, still, fear lingered in Lyra's chest. The next morning proved her fears true. When Daniel stepped outside to buy supplies, 3 aliens stood at the edge of the street, waiting. Their eyes narrowed as they saw him. "Human," one said sharply. "You must send her away. The widow carries death. She does not belong in our district." Daniel set down the basket he carried. His jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "She belongs wherever she can live in peace, and that's here," the aliens hissed, anger flashing in their eyes. "You defy the elders? You defy the people?" Daniel's gaze did not waver. "I defy cruelty." The crowd that had gathered gasped. Some murmured in disbelief. Others whispered with grudging admiration. But the 3 who had spoken turned away in fury, their faces twisted with hate. Lyra saw it all from the doorway. Her hands trembled as Daniel came back inside. When the door closed, she whispered, "You shouldn't have said that. Now they will never forgive you." Daniel placed the basket on the table. His expression was unreadable, but his words were firm. "I don't need their forgiveness. I only need to keep you safe." Her chest tightened, her heart caught between fear and something deeper she dared not name. That night, the voices outside grew louder. Shadows moved beyond the workshop window and curses were hurled at the walls. "Human fool," they shouted. "You'll regret this. Throw her out. She'll bring death to us all." Lyra sat near the fire, her hands pressed against her ears. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I told you this would happen." Daniel stood by the door, his arms crossed. His face was calm, but his eyes burned like coals. "Let them shout," he said. "Words don't break walls." But deep down, Lyra knew words could lead to worse. She had seen mobs before. She had seen how quickly fear could turn into fire. The next day, some neighbors refused to sell Daniel the parts he needed. They turned their backs, muttering curses under their breath. He returned empty-handed, but still, his expression did not change. When Lyra saw the frustration in his eyes, her guilt nearly crushed her. She fell to her knees before him. "Please," she begged, "let me go. If I leave, they will stop. You will be safe." Daniel crouched down, lifting her chin so her tear-filled eyes met his. His voice was steady, low. "Lyra, listen to me. Safety built on cruelty is no safety at all. I will not throw you out to please them." Her lips trembled, her heart twisting. She wanted to argue, but his words carried a strength she could not fight. Outside, the voices of the crowd rose higher each night, their hatred growing stronger. Inside, the fire burned, and for Lyra, Daniel's workshop became more than a room. It was a fragile island of warmth standing against a storm. And though fear filled her heart, another feeling grew quietly beside it. Hope that maybe, just maybe, one human's defiance could be stronger than the voices of a whole crowd. The voices of the crowd had become a storm. For days, Daniel's workshop was surrounded by whispers, curses, and threats. At first, it was only stones thrown against the walls. Then it was broken glass scattered at the door. Lyra lived in constant fear, her hands shaking every time she heard footsteps outside. Daniel, however, remained calm. He worked on his machines as if the noise outside did not exist. But in his silence, his eyes grew sharper, his movements harder. He knew what was coming, and so did Lyra. That night the air felt different, heavy, restless. The streets outside were too quiet, as if holding their breath. Lyra sat near the fire, her hands clutching Daniel's coat tightly around her shoulders. She whispered, "They will not stop. I know what comes next." Daniel looked at her, his face half in shadow. "Let them come," he said softly. "This is my home." But Lyra's heart raced. She had seen mobs before. She knew how fear could turn into fire, and she feared she had brought destruction upon the only person who had ever shown her kindness. Hours passed. Then, without warning, the silence outside broke. Shouts filled the street. Feet pounded against stone, and then came the smell. Smoke. Lyra's eyes widened in horror. Through the small window, she saw flames licking at the corner of the workshop wall. The crowd had set fire to the building. Her voice broke into a scream. "Daniel, they will burn us alive!" Daniel rushed to the door, slamming it shut as figures tried to push inside. The wood rattled under the weight of fists. Angry voices shouted, "Give her up! Send out the cursed widow, or burn with her!" Lyra fell to her knees, trembling. Her worst fear had come true. She had dragged this man into ruin. Tears blurred her vision as she cried, "Let me go to them. If I walk out, they will leave you. Please, Daniel, let me end this." Daniel turned, his face lit by the glow of the spreading fire. His eyes burned with defiance. "No," he growled, his voice steady like steel. "I will never hand you to them." He grabbed a bucket of water and threw it against the flames, seeping through the cracks. The fire hissed but grew stronger, fed by the mob's rage. The pounding on the door grew louder. The voices screamed, "She is death. She will curse us all." Daniel's jaw tightened. He pushed a heavy table against the door, blocking it. His chest rose and fell with controlled fury. Then he turned back to Lyra, kneeling beside her, trembling. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his hand gripping her shoulder. "You are not their curse. You are their excuse. They want someone to blame, and they chose you. But I will not let them destroy you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why would you risk everything for me?" Daniel's voice was low but unshaken. "Because you deserve to live. Because no one has the right to treat you like this, and because you are not alone anymore." The words struck her heart like a thunderbolt. For years, she had been told she was cursed, worthless, unwanted. But here, in the middle of fire and hatred, one human declared she was worth saving. The fire roared louder, smoke filling the room. Daniel coughed, pulling Lyra to her feet. "Stay low," he ordered, dragging her toward the back wall. He kicked open a small hatch leading to the alley behind the workshop. But before they could escape, the front door cracked open under the mob's weight. Faces filled with hate appeared in the flames. Lyra froze in terror, but Daniel stepped forward, grabbing a heavy metal bar from his workbench. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You want fire? Then come through me." For a moment the crowd hesitated. The firelight shone on Daniel's face, his stance strong, his weapon ready. He looked like more than just a man. He looked like a wall of iron standing against the storm. The mob shouted again, but none dared to step forward. The flames they had lit were now threatening to consume them too. Smoke poured into the street, choking their anger. One by one they fell back, retreating into the night. Daniel slammed the broken door shut and dragged more water onto the fire. Hours passed before the flames finally died, leaving the workshop scarred and blackened but still standing. Inside, Lyra collapsed against the wall, coughing, tears streaking her soot-covered face. She whispered, "You could have let me go. You could have been free of me." Daniel, his chest heaving from the smoke, looked at her with steady eyes. "I don't want to be free of you." Her heart stopped at those words. In the middle of smoke and ruin, she realized the truth. This man had chosen her. Not out of pity, not out of duty, but out of something stronger. She pressed her forehead against his chest, sobbing. And for the first time her tears were not only of pain, they were of hope. Outside, the ashes smoldered. The mob had failed. And though the night was filled with smoke, inside the workshop, the fire of something far stronger had begun to burn. The morning after the fire, the city smelled of smoke. Ash still drifted in the air, clinging to the rooftops and the streets. Daniel's workshop was blackened on one side, its walls scarred by the flames. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and the door still bore marks of fists and fire. Inside, the room was quiet. Lyra sat wrapped in Daniel's coat, her eyes fixed on the glowing furnace. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, but her hands were steady now. For the first time in years, she did not shake from cold or fear. She breathed slowly, deeply, as if she was learning again what it meant to be alive. Daniel entered from the side room, carrying a bucket of water. His arms were scratched, his clothes covered in ash, but his steps were firm. He looked at her, and for a moment his stern expression softened. "You should rest more," he said gently. Lyra shook her head. Her voice was soft but steady. "If I rest now, I will only dream of fire. Better to stay awake." Daniel nodded, once. He placed the bucket down and sat across from her. For a long moment they simply looked at the fire. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt safe. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice trembling. "Last night, you could have given me to them. You could have saved your home, your machines, your peace, but you didn't." She lowered her head, tears forming. "Why? Why carry a burden that isn't yours?" Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His voice was quiet, but filled with weight. "Because you are not a burden, Lyra. You are a person. They call you cursed, but I see someone who survived when everyone else turned their backs. That takes more strength than they will ever know." Her tears spilled over. For so long she had been told she was worthless, unwanted, broken. But in Daniel's words, she heard something she thought she would never hear again. Value. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "No home wanted me. No door opened. I was nothing to them. But you gave me warmth." She pressed her hands against her chest. "That is more than a home. That is life." Daniel's gaze softened. He reached across the small distance and placed his rough hand over hers. His grip was firm, steady. "Then stay," he said. "Stay as long as you want. Not just for tonight. Not just for the cold. Stay because you deserve a place where you are wanted." Lyra's breath caught. Her heart pounded in her chest, caught between fear and hope. For years she had lived believing no one would ever say those words. She had lived as a shadow. Now this human had pulled her back into the light, she whispered, almost afraid of her own voice. "And if they come again? If they burn this place to the ground?" Daniel's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "Then we build it again. Together." The word together struck her harder than any fire. For the first time, she was not alone in her fight against the world. Outside, the city began to stir. Neighbors whispered about the failed fire, about the human who had stood against a mob. Some mocked him as a fool, but others, quieter voices, spoke differently. Some had seen his courage, his refusal to bend to fear. And slowly, doubt began to grow in their hearts. Perhaps the widow was not cursed after all. Perhaps the curse was in their cruelty. Days turned into weeks. The scars of the fire remained on the workshop walls, but inside, life grew brighter. Lyra began to smile again, small, fragile smiles that returned like flowers after a long winter. She learned to help Daniel with his machines, her hands steadying tools, her laughter soft when mistakes were made. Every night, as the fire burned in the furnace, she would wrap herself in Daniel's coat, and he would sit beside her. They spoke, little, but they did not need many words. Warmth spoke for them. One evening, as the sun set beyond the alien city, painting the sky in red and gold, Lyra turned to him. Her eyes glistened in the fading light. "You saved me," she whispered. "Not just from the cold, not just from the fire. You saved me from being forgotten." Daniel looked at her, his face steady, his voice strong. "No one who still breathes is forgotten. Not while I'm here." Her heart ached with gratitude so deep it felt like a new life blooming inside her chest. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. For years, she had been unwanted. Now she was not only wanted, she was chosen. Outside, the voices of the crowd grew weaker, fading like smoke in the wind. Inside, a new voice rose stronger than them all, the quiet, steady promise of a human who had given warmth to a widow, and in doing so, given her forever. And so, in a city that once spat her, out Lyra found not only a fire to keep her warm, but a home that no one could burn down.